Welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Ryan Richards, a residential loan officer and real estate investor based here out of New England. Today, I had the pleasure of speaking with Ben Simon. Ben is the managing partner at Archer Acquisitions, and today we took a deep dive into real estate wholesaling. We got very tactical into how to source leads, how to follow up, how important the assignment contract is, building rapport with your sellers, and ultimately walking through the process from front to back on how to wholesale your first deal. Walk through some of the pitfalls. What things should you avoid? What things should you focus on to be successful at real estate wholesaling? And coming from a guy who made well over $1 million in just a few years wholesaling, you're definitely going to want to listen to this. So, without further ado, please welcome Ben Simon. Ben, thanks for coming on today. I'm super excited to dive into what you got going on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Should be a good time.
Yeah, I know you touch a lot of different parts of real estate, so we'll find some focus on kind of the acquisition side of things today for the audience, and just get really tactical with how you go about, sourcing deals, what you have going on in your business, and learn a little bit more about you. So
Perfect.
if you don't mind, kick things off for someone listening, telling people a little bit more about kind of what you have going on, who you are, and a little bit about your story.
Okay, quick summary of the background before real estate, because I do think it kind of plays into my mentality of how I approach real estate. But I started my first business when I was 13. That was like a landscaping company. I had like a full crew of adults working for me. I'm like in math class, like texting them under the table, like, come on, we got to get this mulch job done. So I have had, I don't know, at this point, I'm like 30. So it's like 17 years of some type of entrepreneurial experience. And that company I shut down like my junior year of high school. After high school, I restarted it with a friend of mine. Actually, from then, which is like 12 years ago till now, we've been working together the entire time. So that's been a very long business partnership. But it was awesome. Like the second time I started, I had a driver's license. It made it so easy to go around and get customers. But the reason I think that is an important part of real estate is because that morphed into, we didn't actually make money like cutting grass. Very difficult because anybody can get a truck and a lawnmower and like undercut you. Where we really made all of the money is that we were really good at acquiring customers and then managing those relationships and upselling them subcontracted services. So like, let's say we cut your grass and you want to redo your kitchen. We were kind of like, in essence, some type of like point of contact. They're like, oh, do you know somebody who remodels kitchens? And we'd be like, yes. We would make a margin on that. And that was actually a good business. I sold the company. I kind of wish that I didn't. I think today I'd be doing real well if I didn't. But regardless, like that kind of showed me, okay, like this is how you deal with customers. This is how you acquire them. And then I did a couple of businesses in between. And then about 5 years ago, I got into real estate. And at the time, like I literally knew nothing about real estate.
And when you jumped in, like that team mentality wasn't necessarily at the forefront for you. Like when you jumped into real estate, it was more you yourself, right?
Yeah, it was just me. And actually, I had just been in a business. I was working in the cannabis industry. And that was a great example of like what are bad business partnerships. So I was really excited to just get into an industry that was like, I'm not very professional, as you can see on camera, but, more professional, regular people, just a little bit more like predictability. Real estate, one of the oldest industries, is very kind of, in essence, a similar playbook has worked for many generations. So I was like, I like that. And I have no idea how, but I found the Bigger Pockets podcast. And I am like avid podcast listener. I probably listen to 2 or 3 hours a day of podcasts.
Yeah, I did too.
And so I'm just like, listen, like this is gold. Like I will do this.
It's funny how many people find that podcast or some podcast inspiration now. Yeah.
And when I was listening at the time, that podcast was totally different, or the episodes that I was listening to, that was more like they were bringing on, let's say, people that had pretty sizable portfolios, and less of like the stories of like younger people kind of getting into it. But before Bigger Pockets had like the Real Estate Rookie podcast, there was like a podcast that doesn't exist called like Millennial Real Estate Investing. It was like 2 guys in Colorado. That was the one I listened to every single episode. There was maybe like 30 or 40. And that just gave me the playbook. I was like, okay, if these young people can do it, I can do it too. And I got a job working for like an investor developer in the Boston area. He had a moderate sized portfolio in like Dorchester, South Boston, and Mission Hill. And he was working on a really large like redevelopment. And I helped him with like property management, bookkeeping, which literally horrible at. But he was nice enough. He paid me for like a year, 9 months or something. And towards the end, he told me to go become like a real estate agent. The whole time I'm like, punching in these numbers in Appfolio for him. I'm listening to the podcasts. And always what really attracted me is like these people that are finding deals, putting them together. But I didn't really understand how they do it. And I definitely didn't understand how you could invest in real estate in Boston. I remember going to a meeting with a much larger investor. And I'm like, dude, like, you go on MLS, you run the numbers. These deals don't work.
Yeah, where are you getting your deals?
Yeah. I'm like, do people just like losing money in this market or something? And of course, Boston is like one of the best real estate markets in essence in the world. Definitely a top market in the country. So it was very confusing to me. I'm like, if there's no cash flow, why would you invest? And that made me kind of be like very hesitant to, not want to just be like, oh, I'm going to get into investing. Because at that time, like the market was a little frothy. A lot of people were saying like, oh, the real estate market has peaked. And I didn't know. So anyways, when I went to work as an agent, what happened was I was an agent for like 3 months.
And what time frame was this too?
This is the 3 months before COVID.
Okay.
So what happened was I would find a deal like on Craigslist, right? And I would call up like a few investors. And I was very focused on these 3 neighborhoods, like Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan, which at the time were like rapidly gentrifying. And so some people weren't bullish, some people were extremely bullish. It just kind of depended. And I would take them the deal and we would walk the property. And let's say the property was like at $750,000, right?
Yeah.
Afterwards, they'd go home and run their numbers and they'd be like, I'm really at like 650, 675. And it wasn't really my deal. Like I was finding it through another agent or whatever. And I'd be like, I don't really know. Like, let's say we can get to 700. At 700, maybe I'd do the deal. I had no like control, right? I was just like matchmaking. And I started to get a really good sense of what they wanted. And I started to get a sense even before we walked the property. Because I'm like slowly learning the market. And I'm like, this is like such a weird business to be in. Because I know I'm taking them there and I'm supposed to be their agent, but the only way I make money is if they slightly overpay. And I'm like, this can't be the best way to help them at all. Because also I'm thinking like long term, how is that like the best, relationship and reputation to build? So then, and this is a very true story. So then literally one night on Facebook, there was a post. I'm not going to say his name, but this guy, he says he has this property. It was like 3-family or something in Dorchester. And the price point that he was looking to sell it at, I knew I could sell it. Like I was like, that's actually a deal.
That's a good deal. Yeah.
So I call him up and he's like, yeah, but do you understand how this works and what works? You want to sell the property? Like who's the agent? He's like, no, like I'm wholesaling it. And I'm like, wholesaling?
What is that?
What's that? This is a whole new world. And so I was like, I don't get it. And he goes, look, I'll just make it really simple, right? Like you get 10 grand plus whatever the other person wants to pay you. 10 grand, I'm in.
I'll find someone. Yeah.
Sign me up. I literally made one phone call and I sold the deal. And I'm thinking to myself, that was the easiest 10 grand I've ever made in my life. It took like minutes. I didn't even go to the property.
Yeah.
Because I just knew the neighborhood. My investor knew the neighborhood. It was a vacant property. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. So then I don't know, a week goes by and literally COVID hits, like everything's getting shut down. And I remember like having a meeting with the broker who is at the real estate brokerage. And he's like, yeah, you should really be getting more into this. Like you should do more whatever, like to get into like residential sales, like selling people a condo or a house. Oh, what? There's that. Yeah. I was like, if I find like a project, because he was always telling me like, yeah, it's cool. Like you go find the project, they do a condo conversion, you get the back end listings. I'm like, I don't want the back end listings. I just like the first part. So,
and when you're at that point, like when you say, so you're before you had that conversation, like you're looking around on, for off market deals, but somewhat on market, right? You're looking on Facebook groups, you're looking on Craigslist, and so you're finding deals that are already being sourced by someone else. You're almost a secondhand source.
Exactly.
And then you're in that matchmaking position. And then you mentioned like wholesaling. So for someone who doesn't know like what wholesaling is, before you segue into how you evolve that, how would you describe wholesaling to someone who doesn't know?
The way that I think about wholesaling is it's very similar to being a real estate agent, but you get full control over the deal. like in sports, like ball control. If you have the ball and they want it, it's very easy, especially if it's tied up in a contract. So the way that it would work is like the wholesaler, through a variety of channels, will find somebody that wants to sell the property at a discount. They tie it up. They have a full contract, like they could close on it. But there's a clause that allows them to assign the contract to the end buyer. And in doing so, they make a spread. And I don't know the geography of the listeners, but in different places of the country, a wholesale fee could be $5,000, $10,000. In this part of the country, wholesale fees are more like $30,000 to $50,000. The price point is higher, so the percentage spread just leads to these juicy assignment fees. So this first guy, I do the deal, and like COVID hits, I'm like, all right, fork in the road type moment. I'm going to learn how to do the wholesaling. And I asked the guy, like, how does he get deals? And he started telling me, like, oh, I got connections at the courthouse, all this stuff. And he was kind of like a BS artist. As it turns out, like, he actually was a convicted bank robber.
No way.
But he really taught me how to wholesale, so that I appreciate. But we stopped working together after like a month or so because he was just an unethical guy. But really, I just went on YouTube and I just like watched hours and hours of episode, like podcasts, YouTubes, all that wholesaling. How you figure out how to find the off-market deals, the distressed sellers. You kind of have all these questions set up, so you kind of just like figure everything out after a couple conversations. And at first, it was really tough because like cold calling when you're inexperienced is not fun because you don't know what to say. A lot of the people are like, fuck off. So anyway,
and is that so the cold calling route was what you went with primarily for?
That's where I started. And the secret, and I literally just helped a young kid who just graduated college, like learn how to cold call. I trained him. I told him, I was like, this will not be fun, but I will give you my little secret sauce. My secret sauce to cold calling is that if you're like, oh, I want to get into wholesaling, real estate acquisitions, anything like that, like the trick is to do it with somebody else. Like literally I would sit on my computer because it was like, we would use some program. So we weren't actually calling on the phone. It would be like an automatic dialer.
Yeah.
Two of us would just sit next to each other. We would just trade off taking the calls when people would answer. And it worked unbelievably well because then you're each giving each other feedback. You kind of help each other out. You also hype each other up a little bit because you can get,
yeah,
you can get knocked down.
It's the camaraderie. And you have the team building aspect where you can bounce ideas, I'm sure feedback off each other. So for the actual deal arrangement, right? Like, so I have a property I want to sell. I'm like, look, Ben, I want to sell it for $700,000. And you come to me, in that instance, you're like, look, I'll buy your property. Yeah. Now, on your end, from the wholesaler perspective, you then go find an end buyer. So someone to actually purchase the property. Yep. For maybe a higher amount, and you get the difference on an assignment fee. So that's, in essence, I think for a lot of people listening, the benefit is you don't actually have to put up the money to buy the property. Like you're the interim person. Yeah. But I feel like when this wholesaling conversation comes up, I feel like the two big things that people struggle with, which is one we just started to get into, how do you find the deal? And then part two is how do you actually structure like the contract? Yeah. Because I feel like people, they get lost there where they're like, I don't have any money to put up. Do I have to put an EMD? Am I making a deposit to bind the contract? So I want to dive a little bit into like some of that nitty gritty of how you go about the process from finding the deal to then getting a contract together and sourcing a buyer. Yeah, okay. Those are really good questions because like today sitting here, I don't think twice about any of these things, but there was a huge amount of learning involved. Like number one, the contract that you have is very important because I had it set up so there was no risk. Like I literally took zero risk in these wholesale deals. A lot of people would be like, oh, you could use any contract. I mean, you could, but I wouldn't recommend it because you could lose the earnest money. Because the contract, that's your bloodline. Yeah. So if you don't put the right contingencies in the contract, you might be stuck buying the property. Right. And you kind of want like a wholesaler is supposed to be making, in theory, a no contingencies cash offer. So you want the offer to look like it's a cash offer, but definitely have contingencies or little escape clauses kind of like built in. And slowly we evolved ours to make it like really good and pretty bulletproof. But the number one thing that I will say, if somebody was to go down that path, is if they draft the contract, even if they don't have a lot of money, they should definitely find a lawyer to review it because that's probably the most likely way that if they failed wholesaling to lose their earnest money because they'd be like, oh, I thought I was going to get it back. It's like, well, maybe not. Because sometimes also in wholesale deals,
you're dealing with people that it can be very aggressive if it doesn't work out, because maybe they're in a foreclosure situation, or these are distressed people. So when they think that you're helping them out, or they think that the home is going to be sold, backing out is a whole like art in itself. And I will say that's probably like the biggest warning that I give to people that are like really new, when they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to get in the foreclosure. It's like, you really got to understand what you're doing, because that person is about to lose their house. Their credit is going to get ruined. Like, if you think that you can sell the house, that's great, but you should be like pretty bulletproof, I would say, there.
And most of the sellers you find who would sell for a discount are somewhat distressed. They have some sort of distressing event.
It's interesting because that actually isn't what. So if you go online, they're going to teach you like probate, fire damage, foreclosure, all these things that are divorce, right? Tax liens. And that all makes sense, right? Those people are in form of distress. And to kind of put it into perspective, in about 2 years wholesaling, we made about $1 million of assignment fees. So we definitely did a good volume of deals. I want to say 80%, 90% were just tired landlords. They were not in any type of financial distress. They were just the type of people that owned the property 20, 30 years. They would literally tell me, I'm selling you the property below market value, but I don't really need more money. And if you want to buy at this price, great. Otherwise, maybe I'll call a real estate agent. And that is like, to me, music to my ears. I want them to admit that they're giving me the discount, because then there's no funny business later on where they're like, oh, I found out the property was worth more. Like, I don't want to sell it to you anymore.
It's like you knew that up front.
Right. And so that, and still to this day, for the most part, that's like my favorite seller profile. It's just like older. Right now I'm buying a property from a 95-year-old, from an 89-year-old. Like, these are my favorite people, because somebody probably helped them out like decades ago. Yeah. And now they are giving me the opportunity. And so it's just very clean that other people truly can become like a specialist in probate, foreclosure. But that's not really an area I'd be able to give any type of tactical advice, because the more that I tested it, the less that I liked it, because it really was, you have to be a lot more aggressive, like foreclosure. Like, I know something that's good at, you got to go like bang on doors. Like, you got to go to the people's house and be like, hey, you're in foreclosure. I know you are. I can actually maybe help stop it. Or, that was not my style. I just be sitting at home, cold calling nice old people, and we were having fun.
That's great. So how did you find those people? Because I feel like is the biggest question of everyone's like, I can't find these people to talk to. But yeah, I know that type of background resonates with me. I bought property from a wholesaler, and it was the exact same scenario. Mm-hmm. Tired landlord, doesn't want to deal with the property. He probably knows he can get more, but you're giving him just the assurance of a quick sale.
Right.
But how would you advise someone if they're like, all right, wholesaling sounds great. I can get an attorney to help me with a contract. I can start calling people. I don't need to have an incredible, bankroll like I would to go buy multifamily or buy assets. So what would your like thought process be for someone who's getting into the game? Do you start with lists? What type of software do you use?
Yeah, I can tell you exactly what I used, but this is like maybe a few years outdated. It's possible some of these things don't exist anymore. Maybe some of the tactics are also a little outdated, but for the most part, like this type of setup will work. Like PropStream, it gives you all the data that you need. It's essentially like MLS, but it has more data on off-market residential, like 1 to 4 unit properties. And then in there, you can set criteria to build lists. And building lists is all about just taking various data points and kind of stacking them together into a profile that you think will have the type of people that you're looking for. So if I'm looking for tired landlords, I would say probably property should not have been sold in the past 10 years. And hopefully that they will have at least 50% equity in the property. And the data is not perfect, but they do normally know when the mortgage was originated and where they're kind of at in it, so they can figure out a rough balance. So if you're calling somebody, they bought the property 15 years ago for $300,000, they only owe $150,000, and today it's worth $600,000. Well, that immediately is a qualified seller to me, because if they sell it to me for $500,000, right, they're still walking away with a ton of money.
Right.
So if you like, and I guess what I'm getting at is like, it doesn't work to call somebody who bought the property last year, who has a very high mortgage on it. Like you would need to overpay. That's more like what a real estate agent I think would look for. So that was the niche. And then I think ultimately we use something called like Call Tools, which is a more like professional or like more like call center software. But I think that there's something called like Mojo
I've heard
dialer,
of Mojo,
maybe
yeah.
Redex, something like that. But the whole idea is like you get the list, you skip trace it. There's a ton of different tools for skip tracing. In my opinion, you just want to try a bunch of different providers and see who has like better data for your area. I got really lucky. My VA worked for a different company in Washington, D.C., and they built their own skip tracing software. So I was pretty much getting skip tracing for free, which I think probably can add up when you scale. So that's a good arrangement. But that's not like repeatable for somebody else. But in general, you build your list, you skip trace, you upload it to a dialer. In the dialer, it's just going to keep ringing until somebody picks up. So I would say like normally I would expect to get like a lead in maybe 1 hour of calling in a dialer, 2 hours of calling.
What was your pickup percentage, like of numbers you had the dialer hit?
I don't know, but a good amount of people do pick up the phone because the software works for like you put a local number and people pick up, they call back, and you're having conversations. Like, I mean, obviously it's just math. So sometimes like you call for an hour and a half, literally nobody picks up. But I would say most of the time, maybe you're having 4 or 5 conversations in an hour. And like I said, it's a lot more fun if somebody's sitting next to you, you guys are having a good time. And that's kind of how it all starts. Now, what you tell these people on the phone, we can kind of like get into that because I think there's a very good playbook that works when talking to people and cold calling, especially like these smaller, like 1 to 4 unit properties. All that I was doing, like there's a book, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss.
Yeah.
And I just like mastered his techniques.
That's funny. Justin, we're just talking about that. On the last podcast, I recommended a book and it was Never Split the Difference. Yeah.
It's so good. It took all the fear out of cold calling because actually what's happening is you're no longer really saying anything, but you're fully in control of the conversation. So while they think it's like a random phone call, you're taking them down this path and you're qualifying them. And after like a 5 to 15 minute call, like pretty much you should know if that's a good lead. And what you want to find out is like, what's their motivation for selling? When do they want to sell? The condition of the property, and if they already have a price. And if you get all 4 of these things and all of them are, positive indicators, like I can go through each one. In terms of like the price, how I would qualify it is you look up the address, whatever the estimate is, or like the Redfin estimate. If they're immediately saying a price below that, that's interesting. If they're saying a price near the tax assessed value, that's very interesting. And that is a great anchoring technique. When somebody's like, how much is the property worth? Let's say this estimate is $550, but you see also tax assessment is like, $360. Like, well, the town thinks that the property is worth about $360. So that's like in the pricing world, pretty much the same technique I would use. In terms of like timeline, that's not as important with the tired landlords. Most of those guys are gonna be like, I don't need to sell. You want to buy it tomorrow? You want to buy it in 6 months? Great.
It doesn't matter.
So that's more of like maybe a probate or foreclosure indicator. But the biggest thing, and then condition. Typically speaking, at that time, I was looking for properties that needed a lot of work. And they'll tell you, I mean, it's okay, but I've been renovating in about 20 years. You're like, okay, buddy, it needs a full renovation.
I know where it stands. But now, do you find that people get into that conversation quickly? Because I feel like, so they do jump like right into talking about the property.
Yeah. I forget the exact, I haven't done this in years, but I would ask them a no-oriented question first. So I'd be like, hey, I'm trying to reach the owner, 123 Main Street. It seems, I would go, do I have the wrong number? And then they'd be like, no, that's me.
Yeah.
Like, great. I'd be like, so you wouldn't want to sell your property? And then something would be like, well, I might, So I just hit them with a bunch of like that, which kind of like freaks them out. And then all of a sudden, maybe someone will be like, what is this all about? Right?
Yeah.
But you already know, you're already in it. You're like, okay, this is the right number, which I would mark down because that's just good, like for your data management and everything. And then you just start talking to them. And then the great thing about like Never Split the Difference is like asking like the mirroring and everything, but asking the open-ended questions. That's how you get into the motivation. Like when they start telling you about their kids just graduated college, like this is like the meat and potatoes of it. You have like real rapport with the people.
I think that to me is one of the most like interesting things of wholesaling because it's real estate, but it's really psychology. Like when you're on the phone, it's all about getting them to the direction you want to go.
Yep.
And yeah, Never Split the Difference is definitely one of those books that like is super tactical. Yep. And the stories in the book are genuinely interesting to listen to. It's like, high stakes hostage negotiations. And you're like, I'm going to go sell this 4-family, but this is great. But with that, like, what are some of those like open-ended questions you ask people? Like, do you have I know it's obviously circumstantial, but what are some things that you try to get out of people question wise?
I really haven't done this in like years, but I'm just thinking more right now. I'm looking for much larger properties, and it's a very different persona that I'm talking to. But typically I start asking nowadays so there's a difference. When you're talking to somebody that's a $300,000-$400,000 property, the conversation is different. When you talk to somebody that has a, $5 to $20 million property, they're normally like cashing out their legacy, right? So then like I like to ask questions along the lines of, if you were going to sell the property and I completely understand that you're not in a position where you need to sell the property, what would you do with the money? What would you do with your time? That's normally where I feel like now I'm getting into the sauce with them. It's even better to me if it's both like the husband and the wife, or even like the kids are already there, because everybody has a different motivation. And when they're making a decision on a large asset, it's a family decision. And then you really got to understand the more intricacies.
Dynamics, yeah.
But I don't use like I do like mirror and label things, but now I just do it like automatically. But before, I think like the type of question that I would ask would be something along the lines of, this seems like an interesting opportunity and I could be interested, but only if there's a win-win. Like, how do you think there could be a win-win here? Something along those lines where they just kind of start to open up about life. And then that's where you go back in, you mirror and label. And all of a sudden you're 5 minutes into a conversation and they're telling you about how like, really, they just want to spend time on their fishing boat up in Maine. And you're like, all right, let's get you on that fishing boat.
Right.
So that's, I just kind of like, a dog in a bone. It's like, I just kind of like started to figure out when somebody would say X, you say Y, and that kind of just takes you where you need to go. And I was never the type of person, I always do like relationship-based sales. So I'm not hard selling them anything. Like if they were like, I'm at 700, I would never be like, well, I'm at 550, so this won't work, Like, oh, well, 700 could work, tell me more about the property. And then all of a sudden it's like, it needs repairs. Well, how much repairs? Oh, I got 6 units. Well, that's like 150K of repairs right there. If you're at 700, right, there could be maybe a gap in my offer, unless maybe you want to fix up the property first. Oh, no, I don't want to fix up the property. So this is like, when you're starting, it can be like uncomfortable thinking like, oh, they're at 700 and I'm at 550. But realistically, it's just because the way that they're viewing it, just a little different than the way that you would view it. So you can diffuse that situation by being like, I'm not trying to insult you. This is not a low ball offer. And I think that's like a accusation audit is how he teaches that. But along those lines, where it's just like, then you can just say whatever you want. Like, I'm at 400, just based on the information that I have. And you're like, I still want to be friends. That's a line that I use like all the time. Like, I'm a nice guy. I just want to be friends. All those types of things worked really well with like my target persona, which was an investor, typically, that they would have more than one property and that they had these properties for a long time and they were just tired. A lot of these guys, like these old school guys, they do the property management themselves. They renovate the apartments by themselves. Like, it's not surprising to me at this point in my journey that some people are just like, I made enough money, I'm done, because I would never want to renovate the apartments. They've been doing that for 20 years. That's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. I feel like the model's changed a little bit.
Yeah.
With how operators go about managing their buildings. Like the old school model, it was fun. One of the buildings I bought was a 6-family, and it was the same way. Like the owner was the handyman, the contractor, the plow guy. They did all the work.
Yeah.
So at some point, like that's different than if you have people now are building teams and it's much more of a business operation than it was just maintaining the property by yourself.
Right.
So there is the motivation there. But so when you were first starting, you were in like that, what was your unit range you were targeting? Was there a certain parameter you had around, or was it more price driven?
I would say it was more price driven. Like all of my deals were sub $1 million. So it was going to be like between like 100 and 900,000. A lot of the deals were kind of in that like $300,000 to $600,000 range. One reason I would say that makes a lot of sense as a wholesaler in this part of the country is that's a pretty low price point here, which just means that there's a lot more people that can do that deal. As you scale up, the buyer pool becomes smaller, but the competition becomes a lot fiercer because they have more resources. But I think as a wholesaler, like if you drop a pin in a market like Boston and you do like an hour radius or like circumference. Between the hour and like hour and a half is probably a very good area to wholesale in, because now you're in like a tertiary market. There's going to be distressed properties there, and you still have the buyer pool and like the wealth from Boston buying this. So, and that was kind of our strategy. We started to do really well. We started marketing in like Worcester County. We just did very, very well. We caught a good wave, and we went into a couple markets early and we're just like pulling deals left and right, and people were gobbling it up.
And so what were your main markets at that point, that same type of area?
Yeah. Like we did a lot of work in Gardner, Massachusetts.
Okay.
It was so easy at that time. Like literally I could spend one day and get one deal, because you could just drive the town and like a lot of the buildings were abandoned, and that town got like wrecked in '08. And even the town itself was still recovering. And this was like 2022, 2023 or something.
Still, yeah.
Yeah.
It's still in progress.
Yeah. So yeah, that worked really well. Like I never really did well in like Worcester, because to me that was like Boston. Like there's so many buyers there. It was very difficult to get a good deal. I mean, I did, thinking about it, I did do 4 deals in Worcester, but nothing like Gardner. Gardner was like easy pickings. Worcester was like a knife fight to get the deal.
But how important is it to know the value of a property? Because I feel like that's something that people miss, where they're trying to wholesale something that's already at market price.
Yeah.
So what advice would you have for someone who's trying to figure out how to determine the value of the property, and like what level of due diligence do you put in? Because I feel like a lot of times you might have to get the property under contract before you fully know every detail about it. So talk through that process a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So when I started, the guy that I worked for, like he was just in Mission Hill, Dorchester, and South Boston. In South Boston, he didn't buy like west of a certain street. In Dorchester, he bought in 2 neighborhoods, which are the 2 nicest neighborhoods in Dorchester. They were already gentrified, even when he moved into them. In Mission Hill, he had a totally different play. He bought on the worst street, but this was like way back when, and he was accumulating like a large, like a series of buildings to permit for, to build like an 80-unit building there. So he had very, very specific kind of like buy box. And what I learned from him is that like he knew, I mean, these are small neighborhoods, like in submarkets, but like he knew them so well that if I was like, hey, there's this deal, here's the situation, he'd be like, okay, blah, blah. And within like seconds, he'd be like, yeah, that's not a good deal. Or he'd be like, oh, that actually is maybe interesting. We should run some more numbers on it. He was so focused. I thought it was ridiculous. So when I moved away from working with him, I expanded to like all of Roxbury, all of Dorchester, all of Mattapan. But still, at the beginning, I didn't go out of those neighborhoods.
Still had a hyper focus.
Right. If somebody was, I mean, this was like a real deal. Somebody sent me a deal on Holmes Ave, which at the time was one of the roughest streets in Fields Corner, which is a neighborhood in Dorchester. Now it's like all luxury condos. But back then it was rough. I knew at that time that specific street needed to be more discounted, which means if I talked to the seller on that street or somebody sent me a deal on that street, I could just be like, look, if that was 2 streets over, you want it $650, we'll play ball. It's got to be $550 or like no investor's touching that. So I think it's really important when you're starting to become hyper-focused on markets, on a town, on a neighborhood, on a specific street, like really knowing, because also when you talk to the people, they respect that. Like people are fishing for you to overpay. You need to be the one to get in there and be like, look, I can't overpay. I know this market really well, and it's nothing that I have against your property, but that street's rough. Like, it's rough too. And they're like, yeah, I know it's rough. Like they're not gonna, most people like that you actually do business with, they're not gonna lie, but they are gonna see if you're willing to overpay. So, and I see that all the time, like wholesalers, they don't really know what they're doing, but like when they're getting started, they shop these deals that aren't deals, but it's because they're just buying what the owner is telling them, rather than actually like knowing how to verify it. And one way that I was verifying things was I would use like HUD, the fair market rent. That's what I would say is the rent in the neighborhood. If they were like, oh, you can rent for this, I'm like, well, if I put Section 8 tenants in, this is going to be the rent. And that's set by the government. So you could kind of point to that and be like, look, I think that's pretty fair. I know you're saying it could be a little higher, but I can't use that in my values. A lot of people would accept that. So that was one way that I did it.
It's a good barometer.
I'm all about napkin math. I don't use Excel. So at the time, I would always do an expense ratio. So I'd be like, okay, if the 3 units are renting for $1,500, that's $4,500 times 12 is X. And then I would just apply like an operating expense ratio. So this is before debt service, but normally I would use like 32% because in Boston, like everybody was using 32%. Now, with a lot more experience, I realize it totally matters. How are the utilities set up? Like a lot of things matter for the expense ratio, but it is a good rule of thumb. If you can find a market and figure out the expense ratio, you can like back of the envelope very, very quickly figure out what the ARV is. And then you can be like, okay, this is a 6-unit building. It's worth $600,000 each unit. Ballpark needs $20,000. So I need to be getting this at 480 or below to just get it, to market. But probably I'm going to need some equity. So, okay, I'll offer you 350. I assign it for 375 and somebody else can actually make money. Like if you kind of reverse engineer it, you can start to figure out like what is an investor going to gobble up. Because as a wholesaler, it's not really that important to know like, oh, when I walked into this unit, like that specific plumbing stack needs to be replaced. You just need to be like ballpark conservatively, this is the construction budget. Because then you can go back in after you have it under contract. If your investor walks the property and like, it wasn't 120, this is 175. You miss a couple big ticket items. You got to go back to the owner and be like, look, in the due diligence, we found out we have to replace all the heating systems or all the plumbing needs to be replaced and all the electric, or there's an issue with the gas meters, like whatever it is. Owners typically know that. And again, this is one where it's like, if you just go to them with the information, be like, look, I'm not trying to, do anything funky here out of the ordinary, but like, unfortunately, there is a lot more construction here. So either like you could fix it and then we could pay the same price, or we have to do a price reduction. And that normally works. At one point I was using like a property inspector because then I would just send them people like lists of like 70 things. And be like, look,
this place is falling down.
Yeah, you're lucky that it's still standing. So yeah, like the data and the information is definitely like powerful in terms of pricing the property and further building the rapport. Because that is a really good way to build rapport with somebody, right? It's like most of these guys who are tired landlords, like they know that it needs work. If you're able, like now I'm able to like go in and be like, look, you see this over here? Me and you both know that's got to be fixed. And that's probably like $25K. And that might be the main reason that you want to sell the property. Now, when I do stuff like that, the people are like, they're so honest about it. They're like, yeah, I never want to deal with that. $25K, like I have to sell the property. I don't even need this anymore. I'm like, okay, great. Or like a really good thing that I'm learning about more like now is I used to be like totally afraid of like tenants that needed to be evicted. So I like to buy vacant buildings, but now I'm not afraid of tenants that need to be evicted at all because I've learned that process. But that's the same thing. Now, if I went back to wholesaling, I would probably target buildings that had tenants that needed to be evicted because I may know the eviction process better than them. So I'd be like, it's going to cost X amount of time and whatever, let's say 15,000. I'd be like, look, either you go through that headache for 15,000 or you just knock off 25 right now and I'll take the eviction. And, we close in 2 weeks.
Which is value add for them too.
Right. So the more that you know, definitely the more rapport that you can build and the better deal that you can get, which I think is probably why like new wholesalers shop a lot of garbage. I think it's because they just don't really know. They're just excited. They're like, thanks for my offer.
I'm in, I'm locked up, and then I'll find a buyer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like that like thought process it's often missed by newer wholesalers like you're talking about. When they get in the game and they get that property under contract, but then they don't find an end buyer because they overpaid on the initial contract.
Yeah.
Which I think, like you said, creates a harder rapport building process because you were so accepting up front and now you changed.
Right.
But having that like, preemptive conversation of, all right, there might be some things that come up that change the number, then they're prepared for it.
Yeah. It's kind of like today, because after wholesaling, I went on to build a portfolio, but now I'm starting to sell some of these early deals that I bought. And let's say like a wholesaler came around and it was like, they pay me a stupid number, right? Well, first of all, I know what the property's worth, right? So if somebody's overpaying, it's like, I don't know, they're an idiot. I don't know, right? So it'd be like if they, I don't know, I'm just making this up, but like I have a property in Princeton, Mass. It's like a 5-unit. If somebody came around and it was like, I'll pay you 1.2 for it, I'd be like, great, send me the money. Yeah. If they then were like, okay, well, I got to walk with my partner because that's what every wholesaler says. Yeah. And then afterwards, they're like, no, I'd be at 650. I'd be like, you just don't know what you're talking about. You know what I mean? That's not an acceptable swing.
Yeah, the margin of error there is not in tolerance.
So yeah, I think that's where people struggle. And I always recommend for younger people who want to wholesale, reverse wholesaling is probably the easiest way to learn how to do it correctly.
What do you mean by that?
Well, first, if you want to know what reverse wholesaling is, I just Google on YouTube reverse wholesaling Ryan Dawsey, and he literally step-by-step instructions of how he built his business using PropStream. It's literally so simple.
That's great.
But the way that it works is instead of being like, I'm going to go into this market and find this deal to sell to anybody, instead, you find the big buyer in that market and you say, you tell me what your buy box is, and then you only market for those deals. Because what's awesome about that too is you learn really quick. This is the actual market. If he knows the market and he tells you his buy box, that means every other investor in that market will pay the same price or more than him. And I think that's like much smarter than just the spray and pray tactic, you know, like I'm going to market everywhere in Massachusetts and I'm going to look for any discounted property.
Well, especially if you're just starting, you don't have the network for that.
Right.
Like you're blasting it out in groups, or it's not as easy to transition to an end buyer that will execute, because that's a big thing too.
Right. And the EMD. You mentioned that earlier, which isn't really something I think about anymore, but that is definitely something that a lot of new people think about. How do I get the $5,000 to $10,000 that I need? If you reverse wholesale, you don't need any EMD because the guy's already buying it. So if you tie up the right property, you show it to him, he should know in seconds whether he'd be like, yeah, I'll give you the money for the EMD. So I think that reverse wholesaling is a great way to get started.
Like you said, it gives you that buy box to target too.
Yeah.
And it's easily transferable to other buyers in the market.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the EMD always is a struggle for people to figure out. And obviously there's so many different ways to do it too. Yeah. But having the end buyer, there's basically, you're almost like an agent in that capacity.
Right.
Less of a contract assignment and more of a deal placement.
Yeah, but you're doing the dirty work, which is why you get paid way more than the agent. And I would say it's much harder, you know, to find these discounted properties. Like I'm making it seem easy because number one, I'm a deal junkie and this is what I like to do for fun.
Yeah.
But it is very hard to find deals. And that's why, like, you using math, like this is how I think it actually would play out. Like, let's say in Worcester, right? If anybody sent me a 3-family that wasn't in like Maine South for like $500K or less, right? I'd probably tell them I'm pretty interested in the deal, right? So knowing that, like if I was the wholesaler, I could be like, okay, well, I'm going to go find 3 families for $450, right? And then it's like, okay, I could make $50K. Maybe it needs a little work. You know what I mean? Like it just makes it so easy because then when you're on the phone with somebody and they're like, I mean, this thing is great. You can make a ton of money. I'll sell it to you for $750. You just know, you'd be like, no, I mean, 500, you know, like max, you know, it doesn't matter how nice the property is, 500. And it almost helps too to be like, not like dumb, but it almost helps to just live only in the investor value world and forget about the retail market because you just sort through or sift through the opportunities really fast. Guys at 750, okay, not interesting. Deleting him from the, you know, from the list.
Right.
And you just keep going and you will find the right one. So yeah, I do think that's a great way.
And I feel like from that perspective too, like because your point of like everyone has to win. So like the end buyer still has to win and feel like they got a deal.
Right.
So you like even though you know the initial seller agrees, you're going to make your wholesale fee, and the end buyer feels like they're at the top of their budget. You know, it's still a deal that works, but everyone wants to feel like they win. So if you have that investor mindset, you know what they want to be.
Right.
Especially the bigger investors, like they know exactly what the property's worth.
Yeah.
So even if they know it's worth $750, if they're getting it for $740, that might be a good deal for some, but they still feel like they would obviously like to tighten it up a little bit.
Exactly.
Increase the margins.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think is super interesting. But what does your follow-up process look like?
Oh, okay.
Because that's, I feel like, a point of struggle for people too, in any business, but especially in wholesale, because you're wholesaling, because you're building such long-term relationships. Yeah. And some deal cycles might play out, 6 months, a year.
Yeah.
Depending on the deal.
This is where I will be the first to admit I have outdated strategies. I believe now there's just AI plugins that just do all of the follow-up for you, which probably is a great reason to get into wholesaling because that is one of the hardest things.
Yeah.
But really, so the way that you would essentially get the deal or not is how good was your follow-up. Mm-hmm. So we had like a CRM and we organized it and had like tags or alerts that would pop up, every 7 days, 2 weeks, month, because it kind of like, if it takes a long time, they don't want you to call every week, Like I told you a year, you've called me 52 times.
You sharing that ready yet? You sharing that ready yet?
But yeah, follow-up Okay, well, just to give you a little bit of insight into like how to build a wholesaling like business when you're not like a one-man army. So you want to have like your, let's call it your admin side, which is going to do all of the like data scraping, list building, and then you're going to have like your lead generation team, which could be like a cold caller, or they could be sending cold emails, cold texts, direct mail, whatever. That's going to come in. And those guys are going to be like typically like cold callers are paying $5, $6, $7 an hour. It's like a virtual assistant. And you can get a cold caller from a place like Upwork or onlinejobs.ph.
Yeah, sure. I've used that.
And then you're getting into what I would kind of call like an acquisitions manager role, which could be you, depending on how big the business is. Or maybe you're paying somebody here in the US that, you know, is a real person, can actually show up, have appointments. And then once they put it under contract, you're going to want some type of like transaction manager, which could be like an admin person, kind of depends. And then you get into the dispositions, like how you sell it. All of the juice is created in running good campaigns and having a good acquisitions manager. That's where all the money is made. Because if you get a great deal, it's so easy to sell. If you get a tight deal, very hard to sell. So the dispositions person, like my business partner, he did our dispositions and he was like good at it, but I don't think he was like elite. It's just like we found some deals he didn't sell. The really good deals he sold in one phone call.
Right.
And I do think that acquisitions manager, some people have really big wholesaling businesses like nationwide. And I think that their acquisitions managers are making 6 figures plus because they need like real talent to convert the leads. And the more, I didn't really get into this, but like as you ramp up, you start spending more on marketing. So like you have to convert your leads because you have like burn. I actually think like wholesaling is really good when it's in like one of two buckets. One where you're like the one-man army, or it's like you and a buddy, you guys are just crushing it and you spend like $500 a month on software and that's it. And you can pull like, I don't know, 20, 30, 40, 50K a month. That I think is a great setup because you're very lean. I built it to like the middle step, which I think was like an awkward place to be. If I had leveled it up like one more time, then I think there'd be like real juice because you have like a real business and it's not like passive income, but there's a little bit more like stability. But I didn't go in that direction. I switched to just being an investor at that point. So like, I don't know. I thought also a little bit, maybe I'll go back, rebuild it. Could be kind of fun.
That would be kind of fun. Yeah. So you jumped at that middle point before you really were firing on all cylinders.
Yeah. I'd say we were probably spending like $5,000 to $10,000 a month marketing or just payroll, everything.
And your focus now is more on sourcing the deals for your own acquisition.
Yeah. So what happened is, okay, when you're doing wholesaling and you're new in real estate and somebody sends you a check for $50,000 and you put no money at risk other than some marketing dollars, you're winning. You know what I mean? There's no other way to look at that. But at a certain point, you do start to wonder like, okay, well, if these people are paying, like we had a deal, $100,000 assignment fee, you know, these are big fees.
Yeah.
I had another deal that would have been like $120,000 assignment fee. I just started thinking, if there's not much equity in the property, maybe I should buy the property.
That's one would start to wonder.
And so that was the first property. I have like 3 business partners. We kind of like formed a company together, but that was the first property. You know, we all got on the phone and pros and cons. Like, okay, we'll buy it. Immediately after saying we'll buy that one, which is like an 8-unit property in Gardner, we went on to buy like 70 units, I think, roughly 70 units.
In that same deal size bucket, same like 8 to 10, 15.
Yeah, like I would say like 500,000 to 1.5 million. And we built a portfolio on 70, 80 units, something in that world. Those were like BRRRR deals, which people aren't familiar. That's where you're buying a property that's pretty beat up. You fix it up, you stabilize that income, and then you refinance. And hopefully you pull out the majority or all of the initial equity. And typically a lot of people, like I was, using hard money or like bridge debt, which is very expensive. And it's very, in my opinion, stressful because you're forcing the value quickly. And while there's nothing wrong with that business model, like I still, to an extent, am doing this, you're not always sleeping easy.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. And we were levered up 100% because we were using hard money, plus we were using other people as the investor. So it's like, you really got to execute and you really got to make sure that it's a good deal. And anytime a hiccup comes up, you got to figure out how to cover the hiccup by lowering the construction budget in a different area or something like that. But Anyways, we did it. And this is also was happening while the interest rates were going way up.
Bridge that short term
Yeah.
so it can fluctuate.
That ended up being probably the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Because then when with the interest rates going up, we were still refinancing and executing, but it was very stressful. So I was like, I wonder if we could adjust the model. And this is exactly where we kind of switched from doing these like BRRRR deals into more like value add syndications. And that's kind of the direction that we've continued to go.
And what's your, so now obviously you're in the buy side of things, syndications, but what's your, you obviously must like doing bigger deals now. Like what's like your typical day look like now? What do you got going on for activity? Not typical day necessarily. Yeah. Like, I don't care what time you wake up and get in the shower, but what are you guys working on now? What's like the next phase for you, and where do you see the business going?
Yeah, so we bought about 196 unit like scattered site portfolio. But again, these were like smaller properties, but it was the biggest deal that we had done. So we have about 350 apartments that we manage today. And I think right now we're about to buy a 60-unit apartment building, 38-unit, and a 76. So the biggest like change in our businesses is that I kind of saw that there was this big difference between buying the building versus the scattered site portfolio. A lot of that comes down to more like capital raising, which we didn't really get into, but I saw this and I was like, you know what? I want to change my deal flow kind of like pipeline here. And I did. Over the course of the last year, I kind of stopped pursuing the small deals and only started pursuing the larger opportunities. And just like wholesaling, it took a while to learn. And then I built the deal flow. And now, I don't know, that's like almost 150, 170 units. And this is kind of, I would say, like good. Buy like 1 to 200 unit chunks is good. I don't know that I'm looking honestly to scale beyond that, because then you start to get into like institutional size deals. It's just a different game. I'm very comfortable now in the 20 to 80 unit building, and I think I just want to stay there for a while
and then acquire more in that space and just fine tune the operations.
Yeah
That's finding that manageable. Like when your business is firing on all cylinders, it's hard to make a pivot to go to something different because you got the sauce,
right? Yeah, now for me, it's more just like I'm taking so much money from outside investors that sleep easy at night. I want the deals to be lower risk for myself, easier to operate, easier to execute the business plan.
In your wheelhouse.
Yeah, so we're just all of our underwriting, it's become very conservative. And I think this is just a very good place to kind of stay, because people now know if we bring them a deal, if we say, hey, these are the returns that we think that we can get, typically we're able to beat them. And that I think is kind of the key to syndication, is like, set the expectations really low and outperform. Versus when you're doing like a BRRRR deal, you kind of are pitching like, hey, this is a home run of a deal and I'm going to execute. And it just is really tough. We did execute, but like I said, I don't know that I want to keep doing that.
Yeah. The over deliver part, I think, is huge, especially in that space.
Yeah.
Because trusting the operators, like, it's everything.
Yeah.
But I think that's a hard skill for people to learn, is like when to not stop. Like I think sometimes people think like not continuing to reach higher and higher and like do different and more different things, like the shiny object. I want to go bigger and do. At some point, I feel like there's always that point where it makes sense to just like batten down the hatches and just get really good at your wheelhouse, niching down. Something that I experienced in my, small portfolio relative to what you have going on. But that's the point, right? Like you could go continue to buy more deals or go for a bigger deal, but then you get spread so thin and across multiple different projects, and it becomes like the non-sleeping. You're like,
right,
wake up every day, there's 15 problems. Well, I don't just get really good at solving 5, and then I'll do 10.
Right. Yeah. No. And I totally agree. So like for me, definitely, I have ADD. Shiny objects all over the place. But I think also what it kind of came down to is like what I was comfortable taking on from a risk perspective is probably quite different than what a doctor is really interested in investing in. And when I started to see that, it's like, it did take me a little while to simmer down here, but it makes sense to me. They're not looking for these huge returns. They're looking for low risk. If low risk deals are easier for me to operate, it's kind of like I'm shooting myself in the foot by trying to like really focus on these like super heavy value add projects. And so I like kind of like a blend. Like before, I used to try to target, you'd find a deal where you could refinance out all your money. But now I would say if you could refinance out 50% or more of the money in 3 years, that's a great deal. And at the end of the day, that's going to provide very good cash flow for the investors. hopefully that's a pretty easy deal to execute. I mean, I am oversimplifying that. I have like a full team. We have like 20 people. So it's easy for me to just be like, yeah, it's easy to execute. But we have a lot of people that kind of support the process.
Took time to get there though.
Yeah.
And now you've got your systems on all cylinders. But
yeah,
I'm excited to see, obviously, learn more about your business. I feel like we could talk, for hours about. For those of you listening, we're just scratching the surface of what Ben has going on, and there's so many other cool things we'll definitely have to dive into again at some point. But as we kind of wrap things up here, I wanted to. You talked about Never Split the Difference, which is such an awesome book. But do you have any other recommendations for people? I know you mentioned Bigger Pockets, that they can learn more about wholesaling, about real estate. I know you mentioned some YouTube channels. Is there anyone specifically that comes to mind?
I would say for wholesaling, I think the best advice on the internet comes from Ryan Dawsey. And he has a very ethical way of wholesaling. So I think that's a good person to learn from. But in terms of just like generally how I think it's a good idea, if you're newer in real estate and you really want to like learn quickly, well, I think this is the most important thing. You want to learn from the right person. A lot of people do things in like a shady way, to be honest. Like the bank robber.
That's the extreme, yeah. Or they talk online and it's not tactful.
Yeah. But I would say, like, for example, the way that I met you, that was at a real estate meetup. And I think that real estate meetups are a great way to kind of start to understand like who's in the local community. And then as you go to a few of them, you start to maybe see some similar or familiar faces. And I think you can kind of quickly tell who is like a respectable person to learn from that's ahead of you. And it doesn't have to be like, you're starting at A and they're at Z. They could just, a great person to learn from is somebody who's at C or D, because they will take you much more seriously. The guy who's at the end of the game, he doesn't care that you want to get into real estate. You have to be able to somehow deliver value to the people in front of you. So I think I do think local real estate meetups were probably like the number one way that I grew my network.
Yeah, they've been huge.
Yeah. And then podcasts, there's another podcast that I really love, but it started to get weird. But this is what I tell people. This is a good tip. A podcast called like the Real Estate Disruptors Podcast, which is by Steve Trang. All of the recent episodes are like pretty much garbage. It's like a talk show now. It's very weird. There's no tactical advice. You don't really learn anything.
Interesting.
But you can just sort, on Spotify by the oldest episodes. If you start at the beginning, you learn so much in every episode. And he's a big fan of Chris Voss and all this stuff. And those people, he liked, just like you, to get into like the tactical side.
Yeah.
So when you put like 10, if you listen to 10 episodes, 10 wholesalers show you how they built their business. It's like, I listened to one episode and the guy was using this like specific texting software called like Lead Sherpa. I don't even know if that still exists. That software probably made me like $300,000 or $400,000. And literally, I remember during COVID, I would go over to my buddy's house. They were like just watching movies, drinking beers, and I would just be sitting on my computer. Like you had to manually click. So I'd be click, 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 click. And I'd be like, I'm getting hot leads. And they would be like, dude, what are you talking about?
I love that. That's awesome. Yeah, that's my, the goal. Hopefully people take just like one or two tidbits from this. But a ton of what I learned is through podcasts, or through books, communities. But the meetups, I think that's been the most impactful for me, just meeting good people like you and people who are in the markets you're in, which is always different than online communities are great, but you tend to get a wider spread of geographically than meetups you're in the market. Those people are actively doing deals in your area.
Actually, this is a good one. I don't really use it anymore, but maybe I should. There's this book called The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. Keith Cunningham is actually more of like guru / like professional, more like the private equity space rather than real estate. But he has this whole concept around like thinking time. And what it really is just like a book with a bunch of questions. But if you start answering those questions for like your business or like where you're at, that actually really helped me develop my wholesaling business. Because when there's so many things going on with all these like shiny objects, like it does kind of come down to, what are like the few things that you can push forward every day to move the needle in the right direction. And that book provides like excellent framework for how to start like approaching some of those things.
That's a good one. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, he's a beast, just like Chris Voss, just in a little bit of a different area.
Yeah, high energy too.
Yeah. He'll be up there, you'll see him. He'll be like, I will show you how to 4x the value of this company. I'm like, all right, let's go.
I'm in.
But he's like an older guy, and he actually does it too. He's not like a fake guru. He really does it. Not a lot of people know him because he's like an actual operator. And I don't know why he started writing these books or teaching, but he seems to be, it's very good advice.
So I'll have to check it out. And if people it's been a great time having you on, and I'm sure hopefully maybe we'll do something again in the future, because a lot more we'll have to talk about too. But I'm curious, if people want to connect with you, learn more about you, or invest in some of your projects, are you open to outside investment, and where can they get in touch with you if they want to?
Yeah, I'm not really on social media, but if somebody really wanted to find me, I would say if they just message me on LinkedIn. I think my LinkedIn is like Ben J. Simon, or linkedin.com/Ben J. Simon or something like that. They could, or my company is, they could. I don't know. Like, I'm more of just like, right now I have a network. People just randomly reach out to me. I'm okay. More people can. I always like to help other people because a lot of people helped me. But yeah, you could do that, or you could probably find me through our company's website, which is like archeracq.com. And I think there's like a form in there. And if you just ask for me, somebody will let me know.
Get you in touch.
That's probably the best way.
Cool. I appreciate you coming on. It's been a blast.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great time.
Yeah, that was good.